All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. We think this is an absolute triumph that there are more than 10 people in the room at this time of day. So we are deeply appreciative of each and every one of you for being here. I'm going to introduce myself briefly, and then I'll introduce the rest of the panelists. What I'm hoping is that once I've introduced everybody, they'll give 4 or 5 minutes comments on the topic. Then we'll do a little Q&A up here, and then everybody's cool that I'm going to let you guys ask a few questions. So after we've done a little bit of this, maybe the last 10 minutes, if you guys have questions, raise your hand, I'll call on you, and then we'll try and get this wrapped up at 10:05. By way of introduction, my name is Ned Ryan. I'm the founder of something called American Majority. We do a lot of political training, both of activists and of candidates, really trying to develop a farm team at the state and local level. Also founded something called Voter Gravity, which is a database technology company. I'm a board member of the ACU, puts on this fine event, as is Grover. So sitting next to me is Grover Norquist, the president of Americans for Tax Reform. I asked him what he wanted for his bio. He said, that's it. So board member of ACU, president of ATR. Next to him, Marlin Stutzman, congressman from Indiana 3. Lifelong farmer and also a U.S. Senate candidate, with the primary being May 3rd. So great conservative member of the U.S. House, and optimistic that he will get a promotion up to the Senate. We could use more guys like Marlin there. Next to him is Gary Johnson, former presidential candidate, libertarian, and former governor of New Mexico.
And
Current as well. My apologies. Current presidential former governor. And then next to him, Scott Moody, who is doing something for the ACU ACU's Family Prosperity Index, which we think is going to be extremely instrumental as we move down this path. And it's over the next 3 years that we're really going to be rolling this out and allowing people to see what it is. So before this, Scott was with the Tax Foundation and Heritage Foundation as well. So the topic today is the 4 economic horsemen of the apocalypse. And so we've really looked at as being debt and tax. We've looked at as being the regulatory state. We've looked at as also being the judicial state, and then also the breakdown of the family unit. So those are really the 4 topics that we're going to be focusing on this morning and discussing. So I'm going to throw it to Grover. Grover, 4 or 5 minutes opening comments, and then we'll move to Marlin, then to Gary, then to Scott, and then we'll do some Q&A and then throw it to the crowd.
Sure, absolutely. Federal spending is about 20% of GDP, and if we don't do anything, it's going to go up to about 40% as the population gets older, and a lot of the programs continue to get increasingly expensive, and there are fewer people paying in and more people retiring earlier and living longer. At that point, we turn into France, and nobody shaves their legs anymore. And the challenge we have is to how to fix the entitlement, the big challenge on spending, and that's the challenge then on taxes as well. The Paul Ryan roadmap to prosperity actually reforms entitlements so that 50 years from now, GDP is 16% government, not 40%, and that's the U-turn on the road to serfdom that we really need to make. 5 times the House has voted for this and endorsed the proposal. So we know we have the votes there. We just need a president who'll sign it. On taxes, one of the things that we do at Americans for Tax Reform is we ask everyone to sign a commitment that they'll vote against and oppose any tax increase. We have a majority of the House that have made that commitment. We have about 95% of Republicans running federally, House, Senate. All the presidential candidates have made that commitment and have fine pro-growth tax policy. So here, both in the entitlement reform, it's written down. The Republican Party has supported it, voted for it, survived elections having voted for it, which was not certain the first time he did it. We need to elect a president who'll sign the bill. I'm indifferent as long as we get one with enough working digits to sign the legislation. The reason why the pledge has been helpful, and I encourage people at the state level to focus on it as well, is that only after you take tax increases off the table is there any discussion about reform in government. Because increasing taxes is what politicians do instead of reforming government. If you didn't have any money, they'd have to make choices. They'd have to say, this is more important than that. This doesn't really work anymore. I'm sorry to disappoint this interest group, but we're not going to do this because we don't have the money because we have to do these other things. But if there's no limit to how much money you can take from the American people, then there's no political reason to do reform. So step one, don't raise taxes. Step two, which was the real addition by the Tea Party, which was stop spending so much money. And that little 2x4 love tap to the forehead that the Tea Party gave the Republican Party changed a lot of things, and I think make it possible now to get spending restraint and earmarks, which used to be considered a sign of virility. I have stolen money from the neighboring tribes and I bring it back to your congressional district and give it to somebody who lives near you, not you, somebody who lives near you is going to get all this federal money. Aren't you happy? And people were, and they'd vote for people on that basis. And that turned into a bad, embarrassing, slightly dishonest thing, like burping at the dinner table. To go from this is what politicians bragged about to what they run from was the great success of the Tea Party on spending. I think is going to serve us well in the future. So don't raise taxes, reform government, win election, repeat.
All right, well, good morning. Good morning, I'm Marlon Stutzman from Indiana's 3rd District, which is Fort Wayne in the northeastern part of the state. It's great to be here on the stage with several of my heroes that I've watched for a long time. I'm Grover Norquist. I remember showing up at his meetings a couple of times, and there's a paper on the table, and he's asking me to sign it, look at it. It's like, no taxpayer pledge, no tax increase pledge. But
the other one's coming.
I can agree. Yeah, and that's something I can agree to, and signed it as a state legislator, and actually signed it as a member of Congress as well. And one of the things that I know that Grover does do is he holds us accountable, and that's what members of Congress and members of the state legislators need. So I appreciate his organization. I can tell that from the applause that Mr. Johnson is the popular gentleman here, and it's great to be with you. And it's exciting, of course, to be at CPAC. Just to talk about the issues here a little bit, I come from a farming background, 4th-generation farmer from northern Indiana. We usually just try to keep things simple and use common sense. I always try to figure out what lessons I was going to learn in the barn shoveling manure. And now being in Congress, I understand a lot better. And there's a lot. But as Grover touched on, the back-breaking financial burden of government is one of the reasons why I decided to run. We were in the trucking business. My brothers tease me all the time that I went from being a farmer to a truck driver to a politician. I'm really moving down the food chain here. But is having two sons, Peyton and Preston, who are 14 and 10, the reason I first got into politics was because of 9/11. And the reason I stayed is because of $19 trillion of debt that's only climbing faster. And the fact that our economic stability and our economic engine in the country is sick right now is because of the federal government. And this is a bipartisan problem. We can point the finger at President Obama, but the debt was climbing even when Republicans were in control. And so this is something that we all have to realize as Americans, that both parties have a responsibility in this. And that's why this election really matters. We always say in every election that this is the most important election of our lifetime. I think this is a tipping point. Either we get this fixed and headed in the right direction, or we're done. We just cannot sustain the current levels of spending that we're on. Under Obama, we had $4 year in a row trillion dollar deficits, and now it's down to $545 billion, and people act like that's some sort of success, and it's not. And the only reason that we've had that decrease in the deficit is because of the sequester, which again was a failure of Congress and the super committee that was supposed to fix all of our problems. But this is I'm optimistic. I really I believe in America, and that our system of government will correct itself through the people, and that's why this election matters so much. Like I said, if we don't get it right this time, it's going to be a long time until we're actually get out of this mess. But I want to touch on the decline in the character of society and the integrity of the family. My dad, who is my grandfather on the farm, asked my dad when he was in ninth grade to come home to the farm and to work because his older brother was a diabetic and couldn't help on the farm anymore, and they were going to lose the farm if they didn't have the help. And so my dad dropped out of school and worked on the farm, eventually got married as a 19-year-old, and went off and worked in other places as well to support his family. I was born when my dad was 20 years old, a very young man at the time, and facing a very tough economy as well. In 1976, things weren't going well. But my mom and my dad, who worked tremendously hard, stuck together, went through some very difficult times, gave me and my brothers and sisters opportunities that they didn't have. And so, being here today, it's only in America where a farm kid from northern Indiana can actually serve in Congress. And so that's a blessing that we all have to participate in our government. But today, parents and young people believe that the good days are behind us, that the next generation is not going to have the same opportunities that I had as a young person because of the hard work of my parents. And it's all because the federal government has squeezed and suffocated the family through economic means, through policy means, and that's why we're going to have to fight back. And my dad was out working hard and didn't realize everything that was going on in Washington, and all of a sudden, we wake up one day and you're like, how did we get here? And I think that's what a lot of Americans are discovering today, is that we are in a mess, we're in a hole, and if we don't send conservatives who are going to have a backbone, that's one thing that, in this next election, we hear from a lot of people that say, I'm going to do this in Washington, and then they actually get there and they never do it. And I was one of the 24 that voted against John Boehner for Speaker because we weren't doing what we said we were going to do. And so it wasn't the popular thing to do in Washington. There's a lot of threats and everything else, but you know what? It was the right thing to do, and people back home have supported that, and I think that we're in a much better position today than where we were several months ago. But with that, I'll close it out and turn it over to Mr. Johnson. But good to be here with y'all.
I'd like to give you a viewpoint from having been former executive in New Mexico, governor of New Mexico for 8 years, and then a viewpoint as a candidate running for president and moving forward. And I'd like to say that I'm an optimist. I really think that all of this is very fixable, and that there is an optimistic view looking forward. Last time I saw Grover, maybe it wasn't the last time, but I said, man, I'm going to break your tax pledge because in the context of legalizing marijuana, taxation should be part of that equation. And he said I was okay to go ahead and support that. Thank you, Grover. Look, the deficit is a killer. I mean, it's going to be $20 trillion when Obama leaves office. And it's not Obama's fault. It's Republicans and Democrats alike. It continues. Are we going to, over the next 8 years, and now I'm looking forward to potentially being president of the United States or being able to talk about this, are we going to be able to reduce the deficit over the next 8 years? No, we're not going to be able to reduce it. I mean, we got to start with spending. And so when it comes to spending, we need to reduce spending. I propose a balanced budget. Now, with my experience having been governor of New Mexico, look, you propose a balanced budget, and that is something that I would do. If what you come up with is reduced spending, that would be unprecedented. If you just level off spending, that's unprecedented, and that's what I was able to do in New Mexico. New Mexico, 2-1 Democrat. Well, I may have vetoed more bills than the other 49 governors in the country combined, but all of that had to do with spending. Taxes. Look, we need to reduce taxes in this country. It does stimulate growth, but taxes have been going up. And don't underestimate just not seeing a penny's worth of tax go up. That's a formulary that really is optimistic. If you can just level taxes off, that is a plus. we should be reducing taxes. And it is about economic growth. I mean, seeing economic growth actually be stimulated, going up, as opposed to, it is going up, but it's so anemic, it's so flat that this is a factor in all this also. Regulatory environment. Look, it would be great to roll back the environmental or the regulatory environment, but if you can just flatline it, if you can just make sure that it doesn't get worse, there's a certainty in that. And the markets really look for certainty. And if we could provide that certainty, if we could provide that leadership, markets will react very favorably. I propose eliminating, I mean, a lot of talk right now by Democrats. Look, we've got the highest corporate tax rate in the world. Let's move our corporate tax rate down by 2 percentage points. And then you got Republicans that are beating the drum. No, let's drop the corporate tax rate 6 percentage points. Well, I say let's eliminate corporate tax. Let's eliminate income tax. I'm not operating in a vacuum here. I've had a whole lot of free market economists, the entire staff at Chapman University, Jeff Myron. What they're all saying is really the tax reform that's needed in this country is eliminate income tax, eliminate corporate tax. Because you do that, you can eliminate the IRS. You replace it with a consumption tax. Now, I say, look, let's use the fair tax as a template for how you dot the I's and cross the T's in accomplishing one federal consumption tax. But I think in an environment with zero corporate tax rate, why would any company locate their business or start up their business or grow their business anywhere in the world other than the United States? I think the implications for the United States would be tens of millions of jobs that would get added to our economy. Another thing right now is anemic job growth. We have to grow jobs. And to grow jobs, there's never been a focus on entrepreneurs, on the notion of take what it is that you know and apply it entrepreneurially. You can be your own entrepreneur. I was talking to a young lady last night who at first glimpse was a 16-year-old that had showed up at the rally last night in Baltimore. Well, she was 26 and she'd just gotten her PhD in science. And she's telling me, look, I got this huge student loan debt. And the way I see out of it is Airbnb. You know, that's one of the ways I see out of it. Another way I see out of it is becoming an Uber driver part-time. Well, this is the model for the future. The model for the future is Uber everything. Uber plumber, Uber electrician, Uber accountant. It's eliminating the middleman, making you the entrepreneur. And that's very exciting. And she says, but the Airbnb thing, I've been renting out my house here in Baltimore. I've been renting out my apartment, and I've been making a lot of spare money, and I want to pay the government back. I don't want a handout from the government. I just want to be able to pay it back. Well, they're coming in and they're regulating the Airbnb, my ability to be an entrepreneur. So there is an impact in the regulatory environment. And speaking as governor of New Mexico, look, at worst case, you can stop the regulatory environment from getting worse. Best case, yeah, you can roll back and get legislative cooperation to see that happen. So optimistic. These trend lines, though, can't get worse, and they are getting worse. Everything that I talked about, all these indicators are getting worse. Looking forward, I think America needs to make a choice. How do you flatline numbers that are bad? How do you potentially make those numbers actually get better? Thank you.
Thank you. I'm really honored to be on such an esteemed panel this morning. My horsemen can be summarized by the old phrase, demographics is destiny. And we all know that the fertility rate in America has been falling for decades. And there are many reasons for that. Of course, we have the advent of contraception, we have the legalization of abortion, and of course, the breakdown of the family. all of which now have seen the fertility rate in America fall below replacement rate. The average family needs to have 2.1 children in order to maintain just our current population level. And now I believe it's around 1.9. So moving forward, we're now facing as a country a new concept that's being called demographic winter. That's where there are too few young people to replace the generations before them, more specifically the baby boomer generation. I'm going to define demographic winter as this, simply a place where there are more deaths than births occurring. And if you look at the county level, 1 out of 3 counties now are experiencing more deaths than births. When you look at states, there are states like Maine and West Virginia now where so many counties have more deaths than births that the entire state is showing negative natural population growth. I want to talk a little bit more specifically about Maine because I had the opportunity to serve on the Consensus Economic Forecasting Commission there. The Governor LePage appointed me to this, and it was a real eye-opener because you really got to dig down into the detail. And in Maine right now, the labor force is actually shrinking year over year. Now, if you're a business operating in that state, what does that mean to you? Well, that means 2 things. One, there are going to be fewer consumers coming in your doors every year. And secondly, if you have to hire people, where are you going to find them? So for an average business in Maine, this is going to feel, demographic winter is going to feel like a slow-moving economic depression, right? Because revenue could conceivably fall year over year, no matter how hard you work, no matter what your marketing budget is, simply because there are fewer people in the state to visit your store. And on the commission, we had to grapple with that reality because the models we were using, they were all national models, assuming Maine looked like Texas, for example, and that's just simply not true. So we constantly had to pull the models back because they would project job growth beyond which they were actually people in the state to fill those jobs. Now nationally, what is demographic winter going to do? Well, there are lots of studies looking at this issue, but one study looked at it and found that over the last 100 years, the average annual growth in America was about 3%. 2% of that is what we would consider real economic growth, all of us becoming more productive, producing more widgets. 1% of that, however, was just due to demographic tailwinds, right? The baby boom generation, for example, there were more people to buy stuff, more people to build stuff. Moving forward, we can expect that positive 1% to become a minus 1%. So if you take 2% real growth, subtract 1% for the demographic winter, now you're looking at an average annual growth rate of about 1%. And that's basically stall speed. That means America's economies will be just basically eking out enough growth barely to keep the economy moving. Yet, what that will mean also is we'll see more recessions and possibly depressions moving forward. So this is going to have a real economic impact. And we already see it in other countries, Europe in particular, Japan, where there's been practically no economic growth. So what my wife and I have been doing at CPAC this week is we've been rolling out the Family Prosperity Initiative. And one of the key factors that we're showing is demographic winter by state. The Family Prosperity Index, which is a part of the initiative, shows that families impact the economy, and the economy also impacts families. So I welcome everyone here to visit our website, familyprosperity.org. You can see how close demographic winter is in your state, and hopefully we'll be coming to your state soon to show you what you can do to reverse that. Thank you.
So I'm just going to throw out questions, and whichever member of the panel wants to jump in first, you can go for it, and then we can have a little discussion, then we'll move to the next question. One of the things that I'd love to know is we really saw an explosion of the bureaucratic regulatory state with the rise of the progressives about a century ago. And all of a sudden you saw all these different departments cropping up, a belief that these faceless, nameless bureaucrats were better empowered to make better decisions for us and our life's decisions. So if you were given a chance, again, we live in a democratic republic, constitutional republic. We don't have dictators. But if you were given a chance in one day to say, I'm going to fix this bureaucratic state, regulatory state, what are the 2 or 3 things that you would do in that one day to say, we are going to start dismantling this thing and breaking it apart and get it back to its proper role in our government? So, fire away.
Well, I mean, can we eliminate an agency?
Absolutely. I would say
Okay,
anything
good.
to eliminating, combining, whatever you think would be the best approach.
The two agencies that I think, first of all, I believe in the 10th Amendment in the Constitution, that the federal government has enumerated powers, and the Department of Education and the Department of Energy should not even exist, that this should all go back to the states. I mean, Indiana, I'm proud of what we've accomplished in the past decade in Indiana, where we are one of the largest school choice states in the union. This is empowering parents and families. When you give them a choice to choose between a public school, a private school, or even homeschooling, then you're empowering the family. And so this all is intertwined with our economic engine, with the strength of the family. And when you have bureaucrats in Washington who think they know better than what families do, we're again interjecting government between where the responsibility lies at the state and family and local level. So those would be the 2 I'd get rid of.
Yeah, I would argue for 2 different approaches. One is that our answer to everything should not be price controls or wage controls, but competition. And that if you want to keep the price of health care down, you should go the opposite direction of Obamacare, which was more price controls, more wage controls. We should open it up to competition across state lines, and so that everybody can compete and enter the field, and it's that entry that keeps prices down. Some of you may remember that when Ronald Reagan got elected, and he said and he did by fiat end a fiat regulation on the price of oil. He just got rid of it. And Ted Kennedy said that the price of oil would go way up forever and ever and ever, and of course it went down instead because competition brought prices down, not up. So focused on competition rather than regulation. How are you going to fix education? You can't fix the post office by going in with guys with baseball bats saying, be faster, work harder. You make the post office work by setting up FedEx and UPS, and you make it even more when you get rid of the monopoly on first-class mail. You can't make a public school work by exhorting them to do a better job and throwing money at them, and the same people in the same structures are going to be better because they're sitting on piles of cash. You make public education better by having people give them the right to walk out the door at any time. Not only will many people decide to do that, but the public school systems that exist will exist only if they get better with competition. So competition rather than regulation is the answer to everything, starting with deconstructing Obamacare. And then the second one is something Gary Johnson was talking about. I think the theme for this next presidential election ought to be, in talking to younger people, Hillary Clinton wants you to have a boss. Okay? She doesn't want you to be able to wake up in the morning and go decide to do Uber, because she doesn't like Uber because that's an independent contractor, because there's no employee there that can be easily taxed or forced to join a union. And Hillary Clinton doesn't want you to have a job unless there's a way for the unions to get some money off of it, a way for the trial lawyers to sue, not you, but the entire structure. And the idea that you're independent and don't have a boss doesn't fit into the structures that they use to finance and control the economy and society. So, hey, Hillary, I don't want you to be my boss. I don't want to have a boss. I want to go be self-employed and jump out and have permissionless innovation. 1950s, 5% of Americans worked in jobs that required a license, like a doctor's license, right? Today it's 30%. This is ridiculous. Employment ought to be like the First Amendment. There ought to be almost no restrictions on letting people do anything they want to do. There's some restrictions on the First Amendment, fire and crowded theaters and so on, but it ought to be always, the answer to that is no, unless there's some incredibly important reason for it. And people ought to be able to walk into any employment they want, self-employment or work partnership or anything. In the same way you can walk into any church, synagogue, or mosque. Nobody asks you permission or why are you doing that, okay? And you're allowed to say just about anything you want in this country or print it, and that's good. But it ought to have the same freedom for work you do. The prejudice ought to be no rules on that. Let Fred do what Fred wants to do. But he doesn't have a boss. He hasn't, you can't unionize him.
So, waving a magic wand, I would balance the federal budget, and that would involve some really tough choices and demographics. Look, we're getting older, we've got to reform entitlements. If we don't reform entitlements, we're never going to balance the federal budget, and we're going to be left with no entitlements if we don't address that important situation. So, balancing the federal budget. Tax reform. As governor of New Mexico, as president of the United States, look, I'm going to sign on to anything that improves on what we currently have, lowering taxes. But waving a magic wand, I would eliminate income tax, corporate tax, and the IRS. Imagine life without the IRS. It would be amazing, and the bureaucracy to collect one federal consumption tax would be much, much, much less. Like I say, states. Back to the fair tax and how that can get accomplished, they're leaving that to the states, and the states do that anyway. So that's a big deal. And then competition, entrepreneurism. Look, when the whole healthcare debate started, bring the free market to healthcare. Look, I reject the insurance model completely. Why do we have insurance to pay for ongoing medical needs? In a free market for healthcare, we would have healthcare insurance to cover ourselves for catastrophic injury and illness, and we would pay as you go in a system that would probably be 20% of what is now $1. We would have Stitches Are Us. We would have Gallbladders Are Us doing gallbladder surgery for thousands of dollars as opposed to tens of thousands of dollars. Education. As governor of New Mexico, I was more outspoken than any governor in the country regarding school choice. This is going back to 1995. Bring competition to public education. Imagine unleashing millions of educational entrepreneurs to deliver better products, better services at lower prices. And given the unit value of kids in school, that's a big pot of money out there that all sorts of entrepreneurs could do a better job than is currently being done. And eliminating some agencies, yes. One really at the top of the list is the Department of Education. And here's the Department of Education. The Department of Education gives each state 11 cents out of every dollar that every state spends. But it comes with 14 or 15 cents attached to it. So what people don't understand is to take the 11 cents, you got to spend 15 cents. It's a negative for states to take federal school dollars. Another thing that people think about the Department of Education is that it happened, the Department of Education was established under George Washington. Well, it was established under Jimmy Carter. And tell me anything about the Department of Education that has been value added since it was established.
I would just like to put an exclamation point on the governor's comment about tax reform. If we were to, the federal tax code runs tens of thousands of pages. It costs the economy hundreds of billions of dollars a year to comply with. If we were to institute, say, something like the flat tax, it would not just benefit federal regulations, but don't forget, most states piggyback on the federal tax code. So if you forced tax reform at the federal level, you would implicitly be forcing tax reform down to the state level as well. And that, of course, would have billions of dollars of savings to American families as well.
We've really focused on 3 of the 4 topics. We really haven't touched on the judicial. Obviously, we're in a situation right now with Justice Scalia's passing. There's a vacancy on the Supreme Court. It looks like the Republicans in the Senate are going to hopefully not bring this up until the presidential election's over. So it's forefront in some of the debate. But What do we think about the judicial state moving forward? I mean, the judiciary in making these sweeping decisions, its role in our lives, its role according to what the founders envisioned. I mean, think about where it used to reside. The U.S. Supreme Court used to be inside the U.S., inside Congress, inside the Capitol, until FDR decided to give it its own separate building, and you started to see the role of the judiciary start to expand. So moving forward, again, if it's a fair question for all of you to address, what do you think about the judiciary, where it's at, its role in our lives? Is it even close? Of course, we don't think it is, to what the founders envisioned. Moving forward to Supreme Court, just give us some thoughts on that as well. Grover.
I want to start by suggesting the conservative movement shares some blame here by not focusing enough on the judiciary. We get all excited about our presidential candidates, but we don't ask them what they're going to do in terms of appointments. When we do focus on judicial questions, like in the 1980s, it was all about crime. And all we wanted was judges who were going to lock people up forever and ever and ever, and didn't ask the question of, well, if you're willing to lock up lots of people, who and under what circumstances? And we had the abuses of civil asset forfeiture, which came from laws Republicans voted for, which is a policeman stops a guy with a car, there's money in the car, he arrests the car and the money because he thinks that maybe there were drugs involved. And they don't have to charge the guy, they don't have to convict him, he has to go to court to get his car and his money back, even if they say, well, that was a mistake that we didn't know. And there are literally billions, with a B, billions of dollars taken from Americans at the state level and the federal level. If you're in Florida, yesterday the Florida State Senate unanimously voted to reform civil asset forfeiture. Tremendous progress. New Mexico basically did almost the complete fix necessary. You know, unless you're convicted, they don't steal anything from you. How about that for a rule? So some of the judicial abuses we allowed, we tolerated, we thought, let's give them lots of power to do X and forget that then they bleed it right over in not just to fight drug dealers, but to go after any. The first people convicted under the Patriot Act was a guy who ran a strip show place out in Las Vegas. And they used all the new powers against his, I don't know, the sex club of some sort, okay? But not supporting it's not an Al-Qaeda sex club, it was just a sex club. And they go, wait a minute, you got all these new powers, and we use them any way we want, not what we told you we were going to do with dealing with foreigners who are trying to kill us, but people who we want to go look at. So this whole new movement, and I would suggest a couple of things that are moving in D.C. It's one of the few good things with some bipartisan support. Mens rea, evil intent or criminal intent. There are a lot of laws, thousands of laws and hundreds of thousands of regulations that you can go to jail for, and you don't even have to know you were breaking the law or have any idea you were doing anything wrong. It just happened, some bureaucrat said this is illegal, can't do this. You can go to jail thinking you had done absolutely nothing wrong whatsoever, and not knowing it was against the law. That, I believe we can get fixed, and every law ought to have an evil intent, mens rea thing attached to it. You can't be putting people in prison if they had no idea that what they did was wrong, and there was no reason to think that they did. The other, civil asset forfeiture, no stealing people's stuff unless they've been convicted of a crime and the stuff had something to do with that crime. On judges, we really need to get back to some of the property rights issues. I mean, treating people's property with respect. The pursuit of happiness was a great way of saying it, but what he wrote that down instead of was property, because everybody knew that property was included, but he didn't write it into the thing. And we really need to focus on people's property as an extension of what they've achieved and what they've made, and make that as sacrosanct as your home, as your person, and those approaches will limit the damage that judges can do. But if we give them these powers and laws, they will misuse them.
A couple of observations. One thing that I vetoed as governor of New Mexico is hate crime legislation. This is taking off on what Grover has to say, is that convict me for the act, throwing a rock through somebody's window, but convict me on the basis of my motivation for doing that. Look, we've got the highest incarceration rate of any country in the world, 2.3 million people. I think behind bars. I think a lot of that has to do with mandatory minimums. I think we need to empower judges. We need to choose judges that really are ethical beyond anything else, that are very reasoned, that are all about common sense, and that judges would stand up today to mandatory minimums when you have a Louisiana man who 15 years ago got convicted for having a joint, a marijuana joint, and then 5 years later, there was a domestic dispute with his wife. He has 7 children. He's still married. And then, lo and behold, about 8 years ago, he had another joint, and because of mandatory minimums, he has now served the 6th year of a 21-year sentence in Louisiana. Well, I'd like to see a judge appointed that's going to say, look, I have been given this appointment as a judge, and I need to uphold the law, but I am not going to sentence this man to 21 years in jail. I'm going to resign my position as judge. That's what I'd like to see. I'd like to see integrity, and as governor of New Mexico, I got to make those appointments, and I think the rep on me when it came to appointing judges is that I did a really good job. And I did a really good job because I wanted to appoint judges that were going to uphold the law as written, but I wanted judges that would stand up and resign if need be, if they found themselves in a situation where they were committing something egregious to bring about that attention to the public policy side of all this that really needs to get corrected also.
I think another major problem with judiciary overreach, of course, is the short-circuiting of the process of allowing the 50 states to be the laboratories of democracy. You know, going back to the demographic winner analysis, if the Supreme Court never imposed Roe v. Wade on the entire country and allowed the 50 states to experiment with various restrictions or not on abortion, then the 50 million babies who've been aborted since Roe v. Wade, maybe they all wouldn't have been aborted, and we wouldn't be facing the severe consequences of demographic winter today. I think that's a major consideration moving forward with this Supreme Court nominee, is whether or not they'll allow the laboratories of democracy to work going forward.
Ned, I would just say, coming from the legislative branch, that the thought in our society today is that if a decision comes down from the Supreme Court, it is the law of the land. It's not. It's an interpretation. And so therefore the legislative branch needs to take back its power and pass the law to clarify what is the intention of the law. And unfortunately, Congress and a lot of state legislatures have given their power away,
right,
and have refused to use the power of the purse and the power of legislation to actually...
Power of funding.
That's right.
Power of funding.
That's right.
If I could say one quick thing, and then Gary, you can go back to it. Again, it's the legislative branch, and you're right. They're passing down these opinions. They're not laws. They're opinions. Right. And we're acting like they're laws, but we've allowed them to do that. Right. And now we're in this state in 2016 and 21st century where we're acting like this unelected body is an oligarchy that's ruling us, and instead, power of the purse. You know what? We're not going to fund this. We're not going to fund this sort of behavior, sort of approach. But Gary.
And taking off on that point, when I was elected governor of New Mexico, I reformed welfare in New Mexico. The idea is if you were receiving $100 a month from welfare, and I'm using fictitious numbers here, but if you were receiving $100 a month from welfare, what about the notion of being able to go out and earn another $100 and have your welfare cut back to $75, so the government saves money, saves $25 a month, and the person who goes out and finds a job makes an extra $100. That just makes common sense. We implemented it in New Mexico. All the help wanted signs went down for about 6 weeks because I was sued immediately that what I had done was unconstitutional. And I understand this. I mean, I understand the 3 branches of government. Well, I got sued, and 6 weeks later, the Supreme Court in New Mexico ruled that what I had done was unconstitutional, and all the help wanted signs went back up again. And the legislature, which had seen this program demonstrated, which was 2-to-1 Democrat, refused to pass the legislation because all the court is doing is interpreting the law. Here they've been given an example. They could have fixed it, but they didn't. So the role of the three branches of government, I respect the three branches of government, and let's remember that the judiciary is interpreting the law, and it's not the law of the land that they hand down, it's an interpretation, and legislature, executive can sign off on clarifying what the law should be.
Yeah, exactly. I'm going to make one quick comment, and then I'm going to allow you guys to ask questions before we round up. There's two things that I would love to see at some point if I was ever allowed to make some reforms happen. Grover, you hit on something in regards to private property. I mean, private property is one of the very foundations of a free society, and private property taxes bug the crap out of me. You know, my dream someday in the future, if I ever ran for office, which I don't know if I ever will, somehow to get property taxes removed. I mean, try not paying your property tax, see what happens. Really calls into question the idea of private property. The other thing I would throw out, and Marlon, you don't have to give an answer, you don't have to give any comments on this. Someday in the future, I'd love to see the 17th Amendment repealed.
Bravo.
I really believe we have allowed people to come to D.C. To represent themselves, not the states. I think it would be federalism in action to throw the election of senators back to state legislative bodies. But again, that's one of my other dreams if I ever ran. Not asking for a comment, I'm just planting that thought for the future. We've got 5 minutes. I think we can get in 2 questions. If you could ask the question and direct it at one of the panel members, that'd be great. First question.
So there's a new report out. It's an audit of federal assets. They're reporting $3.2 trillion in federal assets for 2015. 37% of that, $1.2 trillion, is just what they expect to receive in student loans being repaid. So my question is what happens in the event that, you know, we enact some kind of Bernie Sanders style debt forgiveness, and how big of a problem bubble-wise do you really see that? I guess I'll direct it at Governor Johnson since he was the one who brought up student loans earlier.
Student loans. What's the cause for high tuition in America today? The cause for high tuition in America today is guaranteed government student loans. You as a student, you have no excuse. You have no excuse not to go to college because there's a guaranteed government student loan. So colleges and universities are absolutely immune to the market. They continue to raise prices beyond affordability, but back to the students. You know, you have no excuse to not go to college because of guaranteed student loans. I feel unbelievably sorry for students that graduate from college with a home mortgage and no home to go along with it. There has got to be something to go along with this. I'm hoping in the campaign here to actually come up with an idea, and I'm open after this to any ideas on how we might address this, because this is a catastrophe and students have become victims in all this. No, there shouldn't be a giveaway, but this is a fraud that's been perpetuated on all of us, and it continues.
In the back of the room.
Yeah, I would argue that those states that have flat taxes, single rate taxes, 9 states, the single rate's 0. But other states, Illinois and Massachusetts, which we think of as deep blue Democrat states, have in their constitution single rate tax. So my father's here from Massachusetts. I grew up in Massachusetts prior to emigrating to the United States. And there, the flat tax is 5% in the in Massachusetts. You'd think it'd be much higher given the politics of the state. But a flat tax, people say, oh, it's fair. Taxation is about taking money from people who earned it and giving it to somebody else. Fairness is not part of this process. Okay. The reason why a single rate tax is important is a politician with a big spending idea says, I've got a big spending idea, and you're all going to pay for it. I'm going to take the 4% up to 5 or whatever. You're all going to have a tax increase to pay for my idea. Okay, we're all listening. And those states don't spend as much and don't raise taxes as much as states with graduated taxes, where you saw both Bill Clinton and Obama get elected with a promise, I'll only tax the top 1 or 2%. The rest of you might want to step out of the room. This isn't going to be pleasant, but it's only these two guys over here that are going to get it. If you divide people in different groups by having different tax rates, you can mug them one at a time. You know, just you, now it's just you, now it's just you. This is the Richard Speck theory of tax increases, that if you can't take on everyone in the room, you take them out of the room one at a time. So I really think that the single rate tax is the best way to protect against general tax increases. At the state level, the other protection against tax increases is other states that you can move to.
All right, we have one last question. We've got 1 minute, one last question, and the lucky winner is in the back. She is emphatically waving her hand at me. You win. Last question.
She was actually more emphatic. Good question. Start at that end.
Yeah, exactly. That end. Save.
Yeah, I think you save money. I mean, I started my own IRA when I was 18 years old because there's no guarantee that Social Security is going to be around when I'm ready to retire. So I think we all have to take on personal responsibility. And I'm sorry? You know what, I work with my financial advisor. Find a good financial advisor, and you have to trust him. I mean, I'm not an attorney. I'm serving in Congress right now. But as far as, buying real estate, farmland is something that I know. I think I would recommend buy something you know. Don't buy something you don't know. Yeah, I would. If I can buy farmland, I'm going to try to buy farmland.
Don't plan on being provided for except for what you save. I mean, it's one of those things where I've looked at and said,
yeah,
here's where I want to be in 20, 30, 40 years from now. Here's where I want my kids to be. And X number of dollars every month going into those. So we've got to wrap up. Quick comments on each of those, and we've got to close this down.
Go ahead.
There's a difference between cheap and frugal. I'm the most frugal guy that you have ever met. And when it comes to assets, I think that 95% of my assets are in real estate. If we're going to see a collapse in the economy, at least real estate at some point hard assets will survive. So whether it's real estate, whether it's whatever hard assets, I think that stocks and bonds, that's what you're going to see evaporate if, in fact, this comes to calamity.
Scott, quick comment.
I live in New England, which is in the heart of demographic winter, and I have 5 children, so don't blame me.
Grover, last comments.
Extra children are a good idea when preparing for retirement. Yes, IRAs, yes, savings. Buy a shotgun for home defense and a gun to carry.
All right, I want to thank everyone for being a part of this panel, and I want to thank all of you for being here. Thank you very much.